Hello, my little bookworms, my little book demons, how are you? Second video of the new year, but we're still not even a week into it, so how are we doing? If you're new here, I'm the Antichrist, I'm Satan's favorite daughter, and typically I talk about all things spooky on this channel, generally movies, but today I am doing a little bit of a book ranking. I did this last year, and then also last year I ranked every Stephen King book that I've ever read, so not a lot of book content on this channel, but I love reading. I read every night, and I still like talking about books. This is the stack we have to talk about today. It's really heavy and I had to hold it up for the thumbnail. But these are the books that I'm going to be ranking, including 3 Stephen King books. We've got a Nick Cutter book in there. We've got Dracula. I finally caught up on that classic. And we've got a Japanese graphic novel in there. Oh! So if that sounds good to you, then stick around. But I hope that you don't just stick around for today. I hope that you stick around for all time and devote your soul to me by clicking the subscribe button and also the like button and the notification bell. That way you never miss the next video. Now, to be truthful, before we dive in, I'll just do a little scroll on my Goodreads because as you can see, there are a lot of books on there that I'm not going to be talking about today. And that's just because I spent I think the first month or maybe the first 2 months of the year reading a bunch of short story books. And they were really for children, but a bunch of people send me books like that in the mail. I get a lot of subscriber mail. And if you took note of the dates, a lot of them took me maybe only 1 day to read. So I just was blowing through a bunch of those to, maybe get some short film inspiration. I do enjoy feeling like I've traveled back in time, like I'm 8 years old again, and I've just checked out Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark from the elementary school library, and it was okay. None of those were great, none of those I even recollect enough to talk about. So we're not going to talk about that dozen or so group of books there. Oh, also I borrowed Carmela from a friend, so I don't physically have it with me, but it'll be in my ranking. Oh, can you see my water bottle right there? Oops. Ugh. All right, my least favorite horror book that I read in the year of 2024 would be In the House in the Dark of the Woods. This takes place in colonial America, and it's about a wife who runs away in the woods, basically. She is fleeing her very stifling and abusive home. Now, you might enjoy this. It just depends what kind of writing you prefer. It's very dreamy. It's very dreamlike. It also feels kind of like stream of consciousness. You're not really super grounded in reality here. It's hard to tell what's literal and what's not, and ultimately I don't really think that it's that important. I think that her journey is kind of just one big allegory for the abuse that women have experienced for centuries on end. Eventually her husband and her son are characters that sort of get involved with the story, but not really. It's mostly about her and these other feminine characters she meets in the woods. It's weird. There's not really that much of a story there. Most of the time, I don't really know what this lady's talking about. I'm completely unfamiliar with this author, Laird Hunt. I just don't think that his style is really going to be my thing. And when I really, really don't jive with the style of something, it's really hard for me to even accurately tell you, is this a good book? Is it worth reading? I'm always just going to say yes. Figure it out for yourself, At number 11, I cannot remember my Stephen King ranking. So this is just how I feel right now, the way that I reflect on these books now and how they make me feel now, and just my memory of reading them, because I don't think that this one was dead last on my Stephen King ranking, but it was close, and that would be Joyland. This book's not bad. It's not bad at all. I think that I put it above Apt Pupil when I did the other ranking, but now if I were to think about my interest level in the subject matter and what I would be more willing to reach for again, it wouldn't be this one. I don't think I'm even gonna hold on to this copy. I will either donate it or I'll, give it to one of you guys on my Poshmark. I sell a lot of physical media over there, by the way. It's always linked in the description. And this one, college student Devin Jones took the summer job at Joyland, hoping to forget the girl who broke his heart. But he wound up facing something far more terrible, the legacy of a vicious murder, the fate of a dying child, and dark truths about life and what comes after that would change his world forever. Joyland is an amusement park, and I think this takes place in Maine, because it's just a safe bet to assume that it takes place in Maine if it's King. It's not bad. I think that the main character, he's interesting. He was someone that I enjoyed following. I didn't find the mystery of the novel to be that compelling, and the whole reveal and showdown just underwhelming. So not one that I plan on keeping. I have enough stuff in my library. I just have enough stuff in my life that I need to be pretty picky with what I keep in. So that one can go. At number 10, I did put Carmela, and I feel like if I had it physically with me and I could just brush up on it a little bit or even just read the back, I would be able able to recall more of it, but at the moment, I can't remember almost anything about it. It is a book that predates Dracula and so likely inspired Dracula. I think I remember reading that on the cover, except that it is more sapphic. So I connected to it here and there, but like plot, I couldn't tell you a single thing. I remember while reading it, I was like, wow, I definitely can see like each moment that inspired Dracula. At the moment, couldn't really tell you what those beats were. So, you know, there's that. I read it really quickly. It's a very fast read. I would recommend it. But again, I think another reason why I'm putting it so low is because the writing style, it was reminding me a little bit of this. I read this after Carmela, but just sort of the same kind of like, I feel bad calling it like overwritten because that book is old. It's from like the 1800s. So that's just kind of how they wrote back then. It's not my style, as it turns out. Now, last year when I ranked Frankenstein, it fell into, I think, like my top 4. So either Mary Shelley is really a standout or I'm just super picky with the writing from that era. I don't know which it is. I haven't read enough books from that era. So maybe give me some recommendations based on that and I will get back to you. At number 9, we have Apt Pupil. And like I said, I think that I put this one below Joyland when I did my Stephen King ranking. And I was like, listen, the subject matter of this one, like it's just not a walk in the park. It's not fun. I don't think that I would want to read this again. And now I think that it's the only Stephen King book today that I might keep. I don't know because it would be a long time before I'd want to reread it again, and I don't know if even in my lifetime I would have the time for it, so maybe not. But it's about this boy who discovers this undercover fled old Nazi general just living in the burbs in the United States, and this young boy is obsessed with Nazi Germany and obsessed with learning as much as he possibly can from this old man. Very disconcerting and a really interesting exploration. Super dark character study as well on both ends. I didn't like it that much at the time. I feel like just because it bummed me out, it's something that stuck with me and I have found deeply memorable. That to me, I think counts for more than how happy I was when the book ended. This one also comes with a bunch of random sticky notes and math as well because I thrifted this book. I think I guessed last time that I talked about this book that they were lists of words that the last reader needed to look up when reading this book. And whoever you are, I feel you because Stephen King, he uses a lot of big words. I have definitely extended my vocab because of King. I don't know, should I take these off? I kind of like keeping them on. It's like part of the book's history, you know? Or it just seems like phrases that this person enjoyed. Maybe they were an author. I bet that's what it is. Like they wrote down pallid face hung, lancet of fear, whiz, soapbox race. I think that's what that says. Yeah, I think I'll leave that on there. This math thing though, this card I probably don't need. Good budgeting though, it looks like. Okay, anyway, at number 8, I was hoping to like this one more than I did. We've got Fragments of Horror, and I do want to show off some of the pages in this book. Oh, this also was brand new for me. It felt like I was reading it backwards because you start on the right cover, and so then you read right to left. This is crazy. Like, it's so gorgeous. The illustrations are just beautiful. This was my first graphic novel, actually. I had never read one before because they just kind of, they mess with my brain. My brain never really knows what to focus on first, like the words or the images, and then sometimes I get mixed up with like what I read first in the image. Oh, I liked this girl. I liked this lady. She had a real kooky vibe. But yeah, I mean, the illustrations were just next level in this. And apparently Junji Ito is like a really iconic author, and I don't know if they've done like a ton of graphic novels like this. Loved the visuals, but I found the actual stories themselves to be pretty tame. Or not tame, but kind of like basic. Some of them felt like scary stories to tell in the dark stories, but just in a different font. That was kind of the vibe. It just didn't do a lot for me personally, but I did enjoy quite a bit of the imagery. I did have higher expectations just because of the care and the craft that went into this that is so apparent, but the stories ultimately ended up at the same quality as majority of the short story books that I've read. And that's not including, I've never read any of Stephen King's short story books. I really want to. I'm sure the quality of that is a lot higher because it's obviously not aimed at children. I was just expecting this to be a little bit more adult. At number 7, this may shock you, but I have Bram Stoker's Dracula. It made it to the middle spot on my 2024 ranking. I was pretty bored by this book. I had the exact opposite experience to reading Frankenstein, where Frankenstein, I could not put that book down. I just whizzed through it in like a week, 6 days even, and that was on holiday time, so I probably would have gotten through it faster if I wasn't with my family. Dracula, I think, took me like 2 months this year, or like 6 weeks, or just something crazy. I did not want to pick it up, and when I did pick it up, I wanted to very quickly put it down because it would put me to sleep. I loved the beginning of it when Jonathan Harker is going to the castle. I loved the scenes in the castle. I thought that was so gripping. I loved the imagery. I loved how dramatic Jonathan Harker was, and luckily that was something that was carried through almost the entirety of the novel, but a good amount of it is not really in his perspective, so we do miss out on that for a good chunk of it. The rest of it I just found to be so utterly repetitive. The same goddamn thing keeps happening to Mina, and why are we still so confused? Why are all the men around her just so stupid? Like, figure it out. I was so tired. I felt like I was reading the same chapter over and over. I'm not sorry, because that's just my truth, but I know that this is a classic and people might have words for me about that. So that is what it is. I do have this really beautiful copy of it though, and so I'm gonna keep this, and one day I will reread Dracula. Hopefully when I'm just like, I don't know, in a better headspace for it or something. I'm definitely not above giving it a redemption reread. At number 6, we have Horror Store. This is a really interesting book, and not only because it looks just like an IKEA catalog. In fact, if you take a look at the back, they even have like, the words are in Swedish, and in front of each chapter, they do have like some sort of furniture, and it looks like a catalog, but they get increasingly darker. So that is kind of like part of the book. It starts off normally, a sofa that's everything you ever dreamed a sofa could be, blah, blah, blah. But then as you get to the back, they have like torture instruments. I have realized that Grady Hendrix is just not really the author for me. Last year, I read The Final Girl Support Group, so if you want to hear me talk about that, then check out last year's book ranking. But it's just a little bit young for my taste. I feel like his writing would have been perfect for me when I was like 15, 16, maybe even a little younger, maybe even like middle school age, like 13, 14. There is some really, really graphic stuff though in this book, so I'm not sure who it's actually catered towards. It's just a little bit too fantastical, over the top, to where it loses me sometimes. And also because it is such a quick read, like it's just not dense at all. It kind of just feels like, I don't know if you guys ever played these kind of games with your friends where you just would try to say the craziest thing to like gross each other out. That's sort of what Grady Hendrix's writing feels like to me sometimes. I don't think I felt that way in The Final Girl Support Group. Yeah, no, I didn't feel that way about that book, but it still just felt a little like young for my taste. It still was enjoyable though, but I can't see myself wanting to reread it. It's quite memorable, and I do think that the twists and turns of the story are totally unpredictable. I had no idea what I was getting into with this book, and it just was so much more than I was anticipating. It's a really quick read. Like, don't let me saying that it feels young deter you from giving it a shot. Like, yes, if you read a lot, if you have a high reading level, maybe you'll read it in like 2 days, but it's fun. This might be a good little like airport book or something. At number 6, we have Desperation, which I actually took off the cover that I had on it because I thought that it was so ugly and it just was like kind of getting torn up and I didn't like it. So I talked about this recently, but I actually hadn't finished the book at the time of doing my ranking. And when I finished the book, I ultimately left it in its spot where I ranked it. But when I talked about it back then, I was really excited for it. I was like, this might be one of my new favorite Stephen King books. It ended up falling kind of flat for me because it fell into the it trap, where it just felt like Stephen King, maybe he just really enjoys a very cosmic ending, but to me, I felt the same way with it, where it's like, okay, well, you don't really know how to end this book, so you're just gonna like throw a bunch of shit at the wall. And for me, like 30% of it stuck. I tend to have a problem when things just get too crazy and too weird. I enjoy it when it's done well because typically things like that just never translate to film. The only place that you can experience that kind of a story is usually a book. If you like cosmic horror, then this might be for you. The majority of the book does not feel that way. The majority of the book feels like this very kind of grounded, almost monster story, and there are a lot of very, very unique horror elements in it. But because of that ending and because of just like how long the journey is, I don't think I'm gonna read this book again. Also, it's huge. It would take up a ton of space, so I'm just not gonna hold on to it. I can recommend it, but it's not gonna be one of my top recommendations, even though it is in my top 5 of 2024. But I didn't read a lot of books in 2024 that I absolutely loved. Once I get to the end of this ranking, I'll give you my top non-horror recommendations as well. But yeah, I don't know. The horror books I read this year, just like I wasn't crazy about most of them, including the next one, but I did actually really enjoy The Deep. Nick Cutter has a real knack for nasty imagery. He thinks so far outside of the box of what I would ever consider to be a horror element, and got under my skin for honestly the majority of this book's runtime. I don't know if runtime is the right word for a book. Oh, this still smells new. Ugh, I've only read it once. It smells like Barnes & Noble. A subscriber sent this to me though, so thank you. A strange plague called the Gets is decimating humanity on a global scale. It causes people to forget small things at first, like where they left their keys. Then the not so small things like how to drive or the letters of the alphabet. Their bodies forget how to function involuntarily. There is no cure. But far below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, a universal healer hailed as ambrosia has been discovered. In order to study this phenomenon, a special research lab has been built 8 miles under the sea's surface. When the station goes incommunicado, a brave few descend through the lightless fathoms in hopes of unraveling the mysteries lurking at those crushing depths, and perhaps to encounter an evil blacker than anyone could possibly imagine. I do so wish that this book kind of circled back around to that original premise, but ultimately, as you'll find out, this book is not so much about the disease and the entire setup. And I won't tell you why, but my god, is this just such a well-written book. My problem with it, and why I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, I just yet again struggle with people trying their hardest to like gross me out, you know? Or when people just keep adding descriptor on top of descriptor, just layers and layers and layers, just trying to like make something as crazy as it possibly can be. After a while, I get tired of that. I think that's boring. This book manages to keep me fully engaged. I did not put this down. I read this, I think also probably in a matter of a week. It's a decent sized book, and like it's not dense. I wouldn't say it's dense, but you know, it's got some length to it, and I crushed it. So this was a rare example where I could enjoy those ad nauseum descriptors, because he was describing things that my mind could never imagine, could absolutely never conjure up. Nick Cutter, your mind, strange place, and I respect it. I do, and I respect that. One of the main horror elements that remains entirely consistent is the claustrophobia. This book genuinely stressed me out, and I don't know if I can say that for any of the other books actually that I've talked about, because typically I just don't get scared while reading a book because of, like, it's a book. It happened to me years ago when I read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I reread the book and unfortunately didn't feel the same way, but it reminded me of being a kid again and reading Goosebumps and these images filling my brain that felt like they could be real, just because it was like, how could anybody come up with this? It's so horrible, you know. And when I was a child at the time, the worst thing that I could ever imagine would be like a living dummy. This book will take you far, far beyond that. If you're a horror lover, if you love reading horror books, I think everybody should read this. It's nuts. I will say though, I don't know if you'll feel this way, but the ending left me feeling just a little bit unsatisfied. Like I said, I wanted it to circle back around, and it didn't really do that. I also was just like a little bit exhausted by the ending of it. It was giving just a teensy weensy bit of Stephen King, with a wild and wacky ending, but I don't want to get into it any more than that. So anyway, let's get into my top 3 of 2024. At number 3, we have The Woman in the Library, which I don't know if I would consider this a horror book. Maybe not, because it is like a murder mystery, but it is so unique. Let me see if I can explain this right. So you are reading the chapters of a murder mystery novel that this author is writing and sending to her friend Leo. And it takes place during the pandemic. So she is from Australia, and then Leo, the guy who is reading and giving her notes and stuff, he lives in the States. I think he lives in Boston. So this book does an interesting thing where you're in the chapter from the perspective of, what's her face? Winnie or something? Oh yeah, her name is Winifred. Okay. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but like on this side, you are following the murder mystery with the character of Winifred, but then here Leo addresses Dear Hannah because Hannah is the author of these chapters. So the actual author of the entire book is Sulari Gentle. There is a made-up author named Hannah who is writing these chapters, and then there is another made-up character named Leo who is critiquing those chapters and sending letters. So you read a chapter, then you read a letter with Leo's notes. It's very cool. And my favorite thing about it is how the two play off of each other because there is another subplot that's going on with Leo's letters to Hannah. I loved that. I haven't really read many murder mysteries in my day, to be honest, so I don't know how they usually look, but I've never heard of one that does what this book does. And this was just a random, like, chance encounter. I found this at a Goodwill and I paid 99 cents for it. And it ended up being a 4 out of 5. I, again, was left just like a little bit underwhelmed with the subplot with Leo. I wanted a little bit more juice out of it, as well as with the killer reveal in Hannah's chapters. There was such a good build-up and I was so invested in all of the characters presented that I just wanted a little bit more of a grand payoff than I got. But I highly recommend this book, really enjoyed it. My number 2 pick is not a book that I could really say that I enjoyed, and that would be Tear by Erica McKean. This book was sent to me by a mysterious sender. There was no note and no name on it, but Tear follows the character of Frances, and she is this reclusive and I think very much mentally ill, like depressed, anxious college student. She lives in the basement of a house with 3 other college-age girls, and one day she finds herself locked in the basement. She can't get out. And so you're kind of just following her losing her mind. But then this book flips you on your absolute head about halfway through, and you're like, well, where the hell are we gonna go from here? And then in like the last third or the last quarter of the book, they tear your brain open again. And from that point on, it's just like anything goes. I wasn't really understanding this book for the majority of the time that I read it, but I was so thoroughly engaged somehow, and usually it's the opposite. Like if I can't understand why an author is doing what they're doing, like with Dracula, when I felt like I was reading the chapters over and over, I was completely disengaged because I just was like, what are we doing here? In this book, I was like, what are we doing here? It's definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I could see about half of you giving it a perfect rating and half of you giving it 1 out of 5 stars. This is going to be super, super hit or miss, but I hope that I piqued your interest because I think it's a book that kind of demands to be read. The themes of the book I think are really well explored, and if it's something that you could potentially relate to, then I think it'll hit you pretty hard. I don't think the execution is perfect. I think that the ending feels just slightly abrupt, and if you weren't super engaged, then there's definitely a lot that you will miss. Not that I think things need to be spelled out more clearly for people or whatever, I just think it could have been developed a tiny bit more. I'm so shocked to say that this ended up being my second favorite book of the year, just because while I was reading it, like it's very, very depressing subject matter. It's deeply sad. Not the type of material that I usually would be interested in, but I'm so thankful for whatever mysterious sender gave it to me. I'm thankful that I read it, and I do recommend it. And I wish that I could get into spoilers because this book is so weird and I want to talk about it so bad, but I won't. I won't for you. All right, lastly, my number 1 horror book of 2024 would be Final Girls. Not to be confused with the Final Girl support club, whatever, the one by Grady Hendrix. This one is by Riley Sager, and it's a completely different story. 10 years ago, college student Quincy Carpenter went on vacation with 5 friends and came back alone. In an instant, she became a member of a club no one wants to belong to, a group of similar massacre survivors known in the press as the Final Girls. Now Quincy is doing well, maybe even great, thanks to her Xanax prescription. She has a caring, almost fiancé, Jeff, and a therapeutic presence in Coop, the police officer who saved her life all those years ago. Her memory won't even allow her to recall the events of that night. The past is in the past. That is, until a fellow Final Girl is found dead in her bathtub. Suddenly, Quincy's life becomes a race against time as she tries to unravel Sam's truths from her lies and remember what really happened at Pine Cottage before what was started 10 years ago is finished. Oh, I didn't read that part, but Sam is another Final Girl that tracks Quincy down. None of these Final Girls in this universe had ever met until one of them died, and then it's like, oh my god, what happened? We gotta figure this out. I gave this a perfect score on Goodreads. compliments. I was just thoroughly entertained by this book, was thoroughly engaged throughout. This one was so hard to put down, and I wasn't traveling and I wasn't at my parents' house. Like, I wasn't on any kind of work break, so I couldn't just like blow through it during the day. I only got to read it before bedtime, and I definitely lost some hours of sleep because of this book. And that is the highest of compliments that I think a book can receive. It's very accessible. It's nothing like thematically profound. It's nothing like Tear, which works with a lot of metaphor. It's very straightforward. It's a whodunit. It's just a good time. I need to read more Riley Sager, that's for sure. I need to read more Erica McKean if she has other books out. I haven't heard of her. I think I'm gonna step away from Grady Hendrix. I just don't think he's for me. And I'm also stepping away a bit from Stephen King. What I'm reading currently right now actually is The Hellbound Heart from Clive Barker. I've really been slacking on that one and I'm loving it so far, so maybe I'll be getting more into him this year. I would love to know what your horror recommendations are, and I'm sorry I don't have more to say about this book. It's just a good time, okay? So, you know, at this moment in time, I would love your recommendations. What was like your top 5 of 2024? And also, maybe I should have clarified, these books did not come out in 2024. They're just the horror books that I read throughout the year. So definitely give me your top 5, and then I'll also let you know my favorite non-horror books that I read. Oh my god, The Lovely Bones was nuts. That book was not good, but it was mess, and I was entertained. Paper Towns was pretty meh. I would have really liked it as a teenager, I'm sure. The Woman in Me, the Britney Spears autobiography, or her, what's it called? Her celebrity memoir. It was not good. It just was not good. I know that it was like ghost written, and that really bums me out. Brittany, I want your words. I want to hear from you. There was a lot of revealing stuff in there, but it could have been so much more. That actually does it for the non-horror books that I read in 2024. That's not very many. So I guess I technically read 15 novels, and then I read 10 of those short story books within the first month of the year. Yeah, I read all of those in January. I do hope that I read more this year. I don't know why, but that just doesn't really feel like a lot to me. I do have a lot of books up in my shelf that are on my reading list, and I'm stoked to get to those. My dad also recently purchased The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson for me, so I think after Hellbound Heart, I'm gonna dive into that one. I also might try The Lord of the Rings again. Oh, that's something I didn't log. I read the first 2 books of Lord of the Rings, but because they're all in one giant book, I didn't count it. But I spent a good month like reading the first 2 Lord of the Rings books, and I just don't like it. I just don't like Lord of the Rings. It's too confusing with like all the names of all the people and all the lands and all the creatures, and it's too much. But I feel like maybe this year I'll read the next 2 books if I ever feel like it, and then 2026 maybe I'll finally finish it. I don't know, no promises. Okay, that's why it feels like I didn't read that much this year. It's because I spent a good amount of time on Lord of the Rings. Anyway, yes, so those are all the books that I read in 2024. Like I said, I don't usually do a lot of book content on here, but when I do it right. I actually have done a lot of book to movie comparisons. I've done it with It, which was one of the most intensive deep dives I've ever done, and then I also did it with the Halloween trilogy novelizations. So yeah, there's actually a decent amount of book content on this channel. But for the most part, I do a lot of movie content. I've got new reviews coming this year, I've got rankings, I've got new deep dives coming out, so stick around. If you haven't clicked that subscribe button, just do it. And then also you can check out my second channel. Like I said, I have a ton of physical media. That's what I talk about over there. I also post a lot of travel content if you're into that kind of thing. And I have a Patreon where you get bonus video every single week, depending on which tier you join. More than anything, I just hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!